Beyond the buzzer, inside the game, this is SportsIQ with Larry Smith.
Monday. Glad you're here with us on the SportsIQ. You had a good weekend. Hopefully you did. I did. My wife got caught up in some of the TSA stuff, the plane stuff, made for a long day for her. But for me, it was great. A lot of football, baby. Got some honeydews done. Went bowling for the first time in 6 years. I'll share that story maybe later this week. My whole bowling thing. I love to bowl. Never ever paid money for a ball or shoes or anything like that. Producer Tony, we'll have a conversation. Producer Tony, by the way, is an avid bowler. At least he used to be. He's the guy like carries like 2 or 3 balls with him. Like he's got the big deluxe bag and all that stuff. So we'll have that conversation later. Big show today. We've got Kevin Noon talking to Ohio State from BuckeyeHuddles.com, number 1 team in the country. Getting closer to that big rivalry game here into the season. And of course, it looks like the Big Ten championship game looks like that's in the future for them as well. That conversation here in a couple of minutes. And then a bit later in the show, a great talk with Katie McInerney of the Boston Globe about the new Women's Professional Baseball League and women's sports overall. Producer Tony catching up with her, and we've got that coming up too. Just a lot of stuff. Okay, wild Sunday in the NFL. Quick headlines for you. Houston Texans had the comeback of the day, entering the fourth quarter, trailing 29-10, and backup QB Davis Mills. And remember, C.J. Stroud out for the day with a concussion. Well, Mills throws for 292 yards, 2 touchdowns, and ran in the go-ahead TD himself in the final minutes. The Texans scoring 26 unanswered points in the fourth to come away with the 36-29 victory. The Bears overcoming a 20-10 Giants lead in the final 5 minutes, 24-20. They get the win at Soldier Field. Caleb Williams, a touchdown pass, and then finished the comeback with a 17-yard touchdown run with 1:47 left. The Bears get their 6th win of the season and back-to-back comeback wins over bad teams. It wasn't pretty, but the Colts ran their record to 8-2, a come-from-behind 31-25 overtime win over Atlanta, this game being played in Berlin. The Colts needed every one of Jonathan Taylor's 244 rushing yards, best total by running back this season. Taylor also providing the game-winning touchdown with an 8-yard scamper. Atlanta now has lost 4 in a row. The upset of the day coming from the Dolphins. Miami abusing the listless Buffalo Bills 30-13. A week after holding Patrick Mahomes to his worst passing day of his career, the Buffalo defense, this fell apart. Despite picking off a Dolphins QB, Tua Tagovailoa, twice, the QB was 15 of 21 for 174. It just was David O'Kane ran the Buffalo defense past him for 174 yards and 2 scores. Miami first win over Buffalo in the last 7 meetings. After beginning the year 1-5, the Ravens right back in the thick of the AFC playoff picture by virtue of their 27-19 win over Minnesota. Lamar Jackson throwing for 176. Derrick Henry rushing for 75 more. Baltimore controlled the game from start to finish. Jackson, by the way, 73rd win as a starter in his first 100 starts. The Ravens, now just a game behind Pittsburgh in the AFC North, thanks to the Chargers, sending the Steelers to their 3rd loss in the last 4 games, 25-10 Sunday night. Justin Herbert and his beat-up offensive line, good enough to throw for 222 yards at a score. And then rookie Kamani Vidal had another big game, 95 yards on the ground. The Chargers get their 3rd win in a row. The Seahawks have quietly taken over the number 1 spot in the NFC playoff picture. Who saw this coming? Sunday, they raced out to a 35-0 lead over Arizona and then put it in cruise control. 44-22 was the final. The Lions, Jared Goff threw for 320 yards and 3 scores. Jahmyr Gibbs, 142 yards rushing and a couple of scores. The Lions, the big win over the Commanders, 44-22. Washington has lost their last 4 games by an average of 22 points. Other winners on Sunday included the Rams, Patriots, Saints, and yes, the Jets, now 2-7. All right, producer Tony has our first guest.
Well, thanks so much, Larry. And, college football season is coming down the home stretch. And we've got a pretty clear picture at this point of who the top teams are going to be entering those college football playoffs. One of them, obviously, is going to be the Ohio State Buckeyes, undefeated, just rolling over people. Big win Saturday over Purdue, 34-10, never challenged. We're joined now by Kevin Noon. He is the assistant editor for BuckeyeHuddle.com. Kevin, thanks so much for taking some time and talking with us.
Absolutely, anytime.
So let's talk about these Buckeyes. It's been really impressive what they've done all season long. I think some people thought maybe a new quarterback that might take a half step back, maybe not be quite as good, but they have been dominant throughout. And Julian Sayin has been better than advertised, would you say?
Well, I don't think anybody was predicting him to come in and be just a hair above an 80% completion percentage. Yeah, it doesn't hurt when you're throwing to Jeremiah Smith and Carnell Tate. And I don't want to like skip the rest of the room, but Tate and Smith really are the headliners there. That's going to make you look good. I mean, there's a thing about when you're shooting a basket at the fair in a rim that's the size of the basketball versus throwing it in the ocean. You can kind of throw it in the ocean with these guys. Sure, they don't catch everything, but apparently they catch 8 out of 10 because that's what the completion percentage is. So they really have gotten a lot there, and it's a very quarterback friendly type of offense. And Ryan Day early in the season kept the training wheels on Sayin, but I think we're seeing more and more the training wheels not being there. But then again, they're also not asking him to do anything crazy because this is a team that's one of the slowest in terms of pace of play on offense of total plays, even though I think they did break 70 against Purdue. I mean, that just kind of happened. But, this is a team that's been much closer to like 60, 62, 63, what have you. Ryan Day has said that they will take, that they'll unleash the hounds when it's time to.
And it seems to be this has all been a very predicted design by Coach Day and how they were going to play and how they were going to attack people. You see most schools want to get up, they want to run 75, 80 plays. They're hurrying, they're, trying to go fast, go fast, go fast. It's almost like old school, just butt kicking football there in Columbus.
Yeah, I mean, I think that there are going to be a lot of people who would like to see it be a little closer to 70 plays. I mean, we already have seen some plays disappear with the changes in rules over the last couple of years, but we all grew up with fewer commercials and more plays, it felt like in our football games. But yeah, Ohio State comes out and is very efficient, and it's not quite scoring 40 points a game, just a little bit under that. But it's never really been a case of games being in question. Yes, the Texas game was a one-score game for stretches of it. Yes, Ohio State did trail Purdue just based on how things kind of worked out. Ohio State's really lone punt of the game was on its first drive, and that was after a blocking the back penalty took a long touchdown run off the board. So Ohio State just lines up and does what it needs to do. And, so far it has not bitten Ohio State in the rear end, but, there is the concern with how Ohio State will approach Michigan at the end of the season and how that'll look.
Yeah, 2 more games to go before Michigan, both home games. Almost, you don't want to say this has been such a crazy season. You have to show up to play every week. And Ohio State has really done that. There really hasn't been a letdown. There hasn't been a scare for the most part in things that they've done. They've held people in check. The defense has done their job. The offense has done their job. And everybody gets to the end of the ball game and is thrilled. When you look at Coach Day, and he goes from, everybody has turnover, and quarterback position is one of those positions where you get a lot of turnover. But every quarterback that comes in does a really, really good job. Can we call Ryan Day a quarterback whisperer, or is there somebody else on the staff that's the quarterback whisperer in that team?
No, Ohio State has gone through some changes at quarterback coach. Billy Fessler is their quarterback coach at this point. So, you have that. But I mean, I put it at Ryan Day, and let's even look at the one quarterback he had that was widely panned in Columbus, and that was Kyle McCord, who then went to Syracuse and just did all sorts of crazy things while he was with the Orange there. So even the ones that don't necessarily work out well for Ohio State seem to work out well for Ohio State. So no, he's done a good job in getting guys ready. And would it be the same with Lincoln Kienholz if he were out there as the quarterback? I don't know if he'd be 80%, but I don't see any reason to say that Ohio State still wouldn't be sitting whatever it is 9-0 at this point. I think that Ohio State has just had a good game plan, and again with the weapons around you, and I would be remiss to say that Ohio State is doing this without a consistent running game. The Ohio State's running game is still a work in progress, and that's kind of putting it mildly. It's still kind of a work in progress with what Ohio State is doing there. But again, Ohio State scored 327 points this season, has given up 65. Something is working on each side of the ball.
Yeah, and the defense really has done a fabulous job. I was looking up some stats. They've got through 9 games, something like 27 sacks at this point. So they're averaging almost 3 sacks a game. I think they're having like between 4 and 6 negative yardage plays, tackles for loss. So they're getting the job done. What makes that defense special? You lost the coordinator. He goes on to Penn State, and it just seems the machine just keeps right on rolling.
I think obviously it's personnel is where a lot of it starts. I mean, you have Jim Knowles, who was at Ohio State. He leaves to go to Penn State. You bring in Matt Patricia. Defense actually looks better this year than last year. And we were talking about one of the nation's top defenses. And that's not me just speaking in generalities. I'm speaking in realities. Ohio State statistically was number 1 in a lot of statistics by the end of the season. So, I think you put a lot of it on personnel. I think you put a lot of it on Matt Patricia really having a system that works at this level. Is it going to be as complicated as a full NFL defense? I doubt it. I mean, you're dealing with student athletes who are younger in their football journeys and don't have, can't practice unlimited amounts of time to get down all of these things. But, football is a full-time job. So, they're doing stuff, but they're really performing well in the system. And again, if you look at Ohio State's numbers, I mean, there's the most points Ohio State has given up in any quarter is 23. 23 in the second quarter of games, and we're through. I'm assuming Ohio State's stats are updated. I never know. Yeah, they've been updated since the Purdue game. 23. They've given up 6, 23, 16, and 20. So that is impressive, and maybe teams are starting to figure out a little bit more to get it between the 20s or whatever, but it hasn't necessarily resulted in anybody being able to punch it in on these guys. Ohio State has just been obnoxious in the red zone, keeping teams from being able to do anything. 56% on scores, 31% on touchdowns. I mean, it's just been it's been impressive.
We're in that time of year where everybody starts thinking ahead. Heisman ballots. Everybody's worrying about who's going to be in the Heisman race, who's going to get that trip to New York. Right there in the Big Ten, you've probably got 3 invitees right there with Jeremiah Smith, Julian Sayin, and Mendoza at Indiana. Might the Ohio State vote split itself and help Mendoza?
I mean, that's always possible. I mean, the 4.9 million Heisman voters there are, it's not quite that many, but it feels like it. Everybody's got their own way of viewing things. And, I think in some ways, if you end up with another regional person, so if you end up with somebody out west, you're going to get the West voters that are going to do that. And I think Sayin and Mendoza are 1-2 right now.
Absolutely.
I mean, Jeremiah obviously has put up some really good numbers, but I think people went into the season already with high expectations about Jeremiah. I've got his numbers in front of me: 65 receptions, 862 yards, 10 touchdowns. But, he hasn't even really been able to pull away from Carnell Tate on his own team. He's got him beat in receptions, but only about 150 more yards and a difference of 3 touchdowns. The two have combined for 17 of Ohio State's 25 receiving touchdowns at that point. So, yeah, there's always a risk of kind of splitting the vote there, but having 3 guys out of the same region, do they all feed off of each other? And I don't even know who else we're supposed to be talking about in the Heisman race at this point, but does a Southeastern player, get a lot of bounce because people have a fatigue of, well, we just don't want to sit there and, be 1, 2, 3 out on a Big Ten ballot when I'm in Southeastern Georgia or whatever. So right. I think there's a lot there, but Julian Sayin needs to beat Michigan and then go to the Big Ten championship game and likely play Indiana and beat Indiana. And if he does that without, stumbling all over himself, he's going to be hard to beat.
Is there any concern going into these last few games? I really don't see too many struggles with the first two coming up here, but going into Michigan, is there any concern in your mind maybe that they haven't been tested in that fourth quarter, that most of these games have been over by the fourth quarter? Any worry along those lines that they haven't played in a really tough game, at least not since Texas early on in the season?
Yeah, Texas was tough, but other than that, they haven't. And what it comes down to is what type of game plan does Ryan Day allow to come off the Ohio State sidelines, whether or not it's Ryan Day calling it, it's Brian Hartline calling it, it's Jesus calling it, whoever it may be. Ohio State can't get into playing, a 1-inch war in a phone booth trying to out tough Michigan, because Michigan is plenty tough. And even if Justice Haynes is unavailable, I mean, supposedly had foot surgery. I don't know a lot of foot surgeries you get back from in 3 or 4 weeks. I mean, I'm not a doctor, nor do I play one on TV, but it's Jordan Marshall is plenty talented on his own. But I think we just kind of go from there. But I think that Ohio State, as long as it's able to run its offense the way it wants to, I think that it should be fine.
It'll be interesting coming down the stretch, watching these teams. I think everybody in the country is looking forward to seeing Ohio State and Indiana down in that Big Ten championship game. That'll be a great preview of the playoffs coming up. Would you agree?
Absolutely.
Yeah, I think that's going to be a fun one to watch. I know I'm looking forward to sitting on my couch with some snacks and some drinks and enjoying that ball game. Kevin Noon, thank you so much for joining us, talking about these Buckeyes and giving us a little bit of insight into the season so far.
Absolutely.
We will be back on SportsIQ. That's Kevin Noon. He is the assistant editor for BuckeyeHuddle.com. Check them out. If you're an Ohio State fan, great place to get all your information and follow those Buckeyes as they wind up this great season that they're having. We'll be back on SportsIQ after we take a quick, brief timeout.
You're listening to SportsIQ with Larry Smith.
We lost a couple of legends here over the weekend. On Sunday, basketball Hall of Famer Lenny Wilkens passing away at the age of 88. As Adam Silver mentioned, the NBA commissioner, he has a rare distinction of being not only voted one of the 75 greatest NBA players of all time, also one of the 15 greatest coaches of all time. At one point, he was the all-time winningest coach, was a player coach. In fact, I believe he was the last player coach, somebody who played and coached at the same time. We had a few of those over the years, but he was one of the last. Lenny Wilkens won a title with the Seattle Supersonics back in 1979, took the Sonics to the finals in 78, later coached the Atlanta Hawks for several years. Just a fantastic story. Get a chance, go read his story about really, came out of poverty out of New York. And his parish priest actually wrote to Providence College and said, hey, please give him a scholarship at a time when black players didn't get many scholarships. He goes to Providence, becomes a 2-time All-American, onto the NBA, and was just a quiet, nice guy. Really enjoyed getting a chance to be in his presence a couple of times when he was with the Atlanta Hawks. Also, Paul Tagliabue, the former NFL commissioner, passing away at the age of 84. He had just celebrated in August his 60th wedding anniversary. NFL commissioner, oversaw tremendous growth in the league during that time, replacing Pete Rozelle. I had a funny story to share with you. Interesting story. I was formerly an anchor in Washington, D.C. for 3 years with the ABC affiliate. I'm at a Georgetown basketball game, and I spot Bill Raftery doing the TV call down on the court side. So I'll talk my way down there to say hi to Raft. And he's talking to this tall, slender guy with a baseball cap and just a jacket. And he says, hey, do you know this guy here? And I didn't recognize him at all with the baseball cap and the jacket. He said, this guy here has his jersey retired at Georgetown University, basketball number. Well, it was Paul Tagliabue, who was the nicest guy. Paul Tagliabue wore the jersey 33 for the Georgetown Hoyas before Patrick Ewing. Of course, Ewing got the number retired, so Raftery, always a jokester, one of the greatest guys, not just in sports, but just to have a conversation with one of my favorite people in the world, Bill Raftery, had fun at Paul Tagliabue's expense. That's what Raft does. But these guys, contemporaries, they go way, way back. Paul Tagliabue, another great loss at the age of 84. it was during part of his time when stadiums saw great growth. And I was doing some research last week. We've talked about all the stadiums being built right now, Cleveland and Chicago. One day they'll break ground. Philly wants a new stadium all the way through. And I was kind of curious. The glory years for stadiums was 1990 to 2005. Now get these numbers. From 90 to 05, there were 22 NBA arenas built in those 15 years. There were 15 NFL stadiums. 15 Major League Baseball stadiums. Now, remember, football and baseball no longer share stadiums. So, I mean, these were different stadiums in all these cities. The NBA and NHL still do share cities, still share stadiums. 22 NHL arenas, some of those also NBA, in that 15-year period. It was just huge. So that's what makes SoFi Stadium in LA so unique, in that it's one of the few stadiums built here recently. Right. In fact, I mean, it's only been 2 this decade. That's SoFi in LA and Allegiant in Las Vegas. And again, there's some more coming here in the near future. And that brings me to the big story today with SoFi Stadium. We talked about a couple of weeks ago reporting that UCLA football was considering moving their games from the Rose Bowl to SoFi. Now, it's half the distance from their campus. UCLA's campus is landlocked. There's no spot there to build a stadium unless you tear down the golf course there. It's 26 miles out to Pasadena, only 13 to SoFi. Pasadena was very upset about it. And this was the story. They filed some lawsuits. The city of Pasadena, the Rose Bowl as well, filed lawsuits against this. And they were saying, oh, no. They were just having conversations. Well, some new reporting came out late last night and today that UCLA is preparing, reportedly, according to sources, as the Sporting Tribune, they're quoting sources from 24/7 Sports and the Bruin Report Online, of closing on a deal to move their games to SoFi Stadium as early as next season. Several staffers talking about this. Now, here's the thing. There are some sources, again, talking about the buyout to buy out their existing deal could cost as much as $80 million, but it doesn't stop there. Remember, again, Pasadena and the Rose Bowl have already filed their lawsuits, right? And so they're trying to say, stadium reps and some city of Pasadena officials trying to say that if UCLA leaves the Rose Bowl, it could result in more than $1 billion in losses when you're talking about long-term event projections, stadium sponsorships, the overall economic impact in this. And so if this comes to pass, first off, where are you getting the $80 million? UCLA is not known as a football program. It's really flush with cash right now. But they're hoping that moving there would increase revenue, increase attendance, more people in the luxury boxes, et cetera, et cetera. Rose Bowl seats 89,000, SoFi about 70,000. So the small crowd you do get wouldn't look quite as sparse, I guess. But anyway, the whole stadium thing, thought it was pretty interesting that we always say in the media, where there's smoke, there's fire. Well, we found the fire. There it is. Could be the Bruins at SoFi in 2026. All right. Great conversation coming up next with Tony and Katie. Next.
You're locked in to Sports IQ with Larry Smith.
Glad you're with us here. Sports IQ with Larry Smith here on this Monday, November 10th. Here is our next guest with producer Tony.
Well, thanks so much, Larry. And it is a real joy right now to kind of dive into our next subject with our next guest. Katie McInerney is a senior sports editor, correct, Katie? At the
Yes.
Boston Globe. And we are so happy to have her join the show and talk about the new Women's Professional Baseball League. Katie, welcome to Sports IQ.
Thanks for having me.
Tell me a little bit about, we all know the history of the past Women's Professional Baseball League. We've all seen the movie, great film, wonderful storyline in that one. How did we get to a new league coming about for women's professional baseball?
It's a good question. So the origins of the league rest in its founder, Justine Siegal, who was the first woman to coach a professional baseball team when she was coaching in a collegiate baseball league here in Massachusetts. And she has, for many years, almost 2 decades, run a nonprofit called Baseball for All. And what she did was she helped facilitate girls baseball teams starting around the country. She ran a national tournament for those teams, and she sort of invested in this grassroots league, this grassroots space for girls to continue playing baseball once they might age out of Little League and they lose options in their community when you have to switch to softball. She has long been an advocate for girls staying in the game, despite the lack of pathways for them. And she was approached by Keith Stein, who is a lawyer and an investor, and he's the owner of the Toronto Maple Leafs baseball team, which is a semi-professional team it's a professional team in Toronto, Canada, who had said to her, "Why is there no women's baseball league?" This was a couple of years ago, and they have announced that I'll have to look up the date of when they announced that they were going to start it. I think it was in the fall of 2024 that they said that this was coming. And earlier this year, 2025, they started to lay the groundwork, announcing the structure, announcing their investors. They had tryouts for the league in Washington, D.C. this summer. And earlier this fall, they announced that they'll have 4 teams: Boston, New York, San Francisco, and LA to start the season in 2026.
Awesome. So of those tryouts, have you heard how they went? How are they perceived? How did the girls perceive them? Was it, tell us a little bit about that experience if you've heard about it.
Yeah. So that was something that I was really curious about. How does one find themselves to a women's baseball tryout? There is a U.S. national team for women's baseball. They play in a World Cup every few years. It's sort of, the schedule has gotten a little jumbled after COVID. It began in 2004. And that baseball team is fed by women's baseball players. They just rarely have an opportunity to play outside of that national team structure where they might be doing trainings, practices, not really a huge slate of games. There are a number of women who have pursued baseball through independent leagues with men. There are a handful of the women who tried out who have played college softball. What they told me, that the founders told me, Justine and others, was that there's far fewer athletes who have been lifelong softball players who then switch to baseball than you think. That was sort of what I assumed, was like, okay, you max out your college career in softball. I'm looking for something else. This seems fun. Really what it is there are a handful of athletes who played baseball as a youth athlete, played it in high school on a boys team, might take a college scholarship to play softball somewhere, and then go back to baseball. One of those, I think, is a perfect example is Monet Davis, who obviously became legendary when she pitched in the Little League World Series baseball when she was 12 years old. That was almost more than a decade ago. Now she's 24. She played college softball, DC area, and she was at the tryouts. They actually had 600 players at the tryouts, and they whittled it. Yeah, I know, right? And they whittled it down to a draft eligible list of 100 who came out of the tryouts, and then about 3 dozen more who were international players who weren't able to come over. So that's another part of it here, is that there is a really robust community of women baseball players in Asian countries, especially. Ayami Sato is probably the biggest name to know. She's this pitcher. She's 35. She's from Japan. They used to have a professional women's baseball league in Japan for a while, about a decade ago. And they're often formidable in the women's baseball World Cup and the Pan American Games. And so they have basically gotten the list of eligible players down to about 130. Each of the rosters for the 4 teams will have 15 players. So do the math there. You're going to have only about half of those 130 are going to be participating in the first season. And so it's interesting because one of the things that Justine described to me was that a lot of the players who were at tryouts are players who she is familiar with because of her work in the nonprofit space, cultivating those pathways. And so one of the things I found kind of interesting with this league that I think differs from something like the professional women's volleyball leagues that are starting up right now, those volleyball leagues, volleyball is the fastest growing girls sport in America in high schools. And so those
Absolutely.
leagues, and you've got really interesting trending upward TV viewership for college volleyball. Places like Nebraska are selling out Memorial Stadium to get people in for games, things like that. Those volleyball leagues professionally are sort of starting on the they're starting off of that groundwork. Like they're working, they're trying to level up. What I think is really interesting about women's baseball is it's starting at the top. They're not necessarily trying to get girls baseball teams into high schools, which feels like a futile task. Not necessarily trying to get it at the college level. Also seems like that wouldn't really make a lot of sense. And so they're starting sort of trying to build that pathway from the top and give young girls and women something to aspire to in hopes that they stick with the sport, because as you can imagine, so many girls, especially when they're entering their teenage years and might, need to switch from baseball. They might need, if they want to stay with baseball, they'll have to play on a boys only team. That's a tough go. You're on your own, or navigating independent baseball, which is obviously hard for anyone of any gender to make it stick and, to keep playing baseball. So it's really, it's interesting in that way. And I did find it really interesting. Justine sort of described it because one of the things that I wonder about is scale level, frankly. Really had a really great way of describing it is that it's sort of like a survival rate. If you might start playing when you're in Little League, 9 years old, play baseball, you stick with your boys teams through high school, maybe you're playing at a junior college, maybe you're playing on a club team in college. Like if you are making it through that, there's probably the chances are is that you're pretty good at what you do, because it's such a hard road to walk. And so they're really optimistic about the quality of play, which there's no reason that they shouldn't be. And then another thing that is really interesting about the league is the rules are exactly the same as it always is in baseball. From Little League to the World Series, we're playing with the same players, the same positions, generally the same strategy. And so when it comes to reaching fans, there's a lot of optimism because there's no learning new rules. There's no learning a new sport. And the style of play is going to be very similar. Yeah, they'll pitch slower than the Dodgers and Blue Jays did, but they do at all levels, except with the exception of MLB. So that's really interesting too, because it's sort of like a built-in fan base for them.
Absolutely. And you hit on something in your answer there, talking about women's volleyball and how they're growing into women's professional baseball leagues. I've been a youth and high school official for the past 25 years. I've just recently started to get into officiating volleyball. What I like about it and seeing the girls play is the enthusiasm, the love of their sport. The play is still for each other. They play for each other. They play for love of the game. They play for the enjoyment. I think in the men's sports, the boys' sports, what I've seen on a youth level is a lot of the joy has come out of it. That so many parents are pushing kids to almost be professional at a too young of an age, whether it be baseball or basketball or football. The joy of sport is still there in these women's games. And I think that is going to be one of the reasons that people were going to gravitate to these athletes.
I feel like there's a well-worn trope about women being more emotional that I personally would quibble with when you see a man throw a fit in sports because their team doesn't win or something. But what I do think that that women's sports brings that I think a lot of people appreciate, maybe even if they don't notice it on a conscious level, is that emotion. It's been the journey continues. The fight is not over. It's been such a long haul for women in sport that it does feel like there's this sort of deeper appreciation for being at the highest stage or just having the opportunity to play. And maybe I'm projecting a little bit because that sort of was always my experience growing up as an athlete. And now as a journalist, when I do get a chance to work on stories about women's sports, or I get to go to sporting events around women's sports, there is sort of this, like, it's completely noticeable. Like, I was, the Fever played at TD Garden here in Boston against the Connecticut Sun this past summer. And I was walking around the Garden and the concourse for hours before the game. And yes, there were as many young girls as you think there would be, but that wasn't it. It was all generations. And like, there was just this sort of joyousness that like isn't what you feel when you go to a Celtics game. It's not that the Celtics experience is bad. It's just different. And there's a different type of enthusiasm. And I think that I think that there's another thing that, as you were speaking, it made me think of, is the Women's College World Series, which is such an awesome event. That's a bucket list one for me to go to sometime. And the way that the softball players are just constantly chanting and cheering, and you can hear them throughout the entire broadcast, no matter how long the game goes. And that's sort of like built into women's sports, is that sort of that sort of support for your own team. And then I think about how natural that is for baseball, because if you're a baseball fan, chances are you're a diehard. Like, a lot of people become baseball fans when they're children and ride through the wave with their teams for decades. And you have this emotion, but baseball's a very emotional sport. It's something that it like pulls at your heartstrings. It's America's pastime. And so it just feels like a natural fit. And I think too, that like one of the things, this is a little separate, but I always love this. When Justine Siegal, the founder, was like, she's like, people, when they're like, people who love baseball at all levels. A lot of people, when they're traveling, they'll see, oh, it's a team in town. And I was like, yes, literally every time myself and my husband go on a trip, we look at the schedule to see if team is in town. Because obviously we want to go to a new ballpark. We want to go see baseball anytime we can. And so I think it's a fun combination. And it's really like, bad pun, out of left field. I don't think it would be, if you'd asked me last year, like, oh, what's the next sport that's going to add a women's league? I wouldn't have picked a sport that doesn't have any youth infrastructure really, except for Justine's nonprofits. But that's kind of what makes it fun. It's like a blank slate for how to build this league. So it should be really interesting to watch.
It should be a lot of fun. And like you said, it should be very interesting to watch and see how they grow it and see where it goes. I mean, we're in an era, I think this is kind of like, I almost want to describe it as a golden age of women's sports. We're starting, we're still growing. We haven't gotten there yet. But the women's soccer team of 20 years ago kind of pushed that door open. The WNBA pushed it a little bit. Now you're seeing, I spent my spring watching the Women's College World Series. What an absolute fabulous event. I mean, every night was must-see TV. The drama was incredible. The level of play was incredible. The people in the stands, everybody was involved. It was wonderful to watch. Same with college basketball. Watching women's college volleyball. I was watching a match the other night. It was a fabulous match. Nebraska was playing. I think, I forget who they're playing, but it was a great match. And they played at such a high level. And it was wonderful to see. And you see the stands at these women's events filling up. And I think that's a good sign for everybody, that people, like you talked about, of all generations going to see these. It's not just about young girls. It's not just about young women. It's about men, women, and all ages coming together just to see great athletes, because that's the bottom line, do what they do best.
Right. And there are 2 points to that. I think that from the top level business side of it, the high profile investors, as everyone has seen how much money has been flowing into women's sports, we're talking about $250 million expansion fees for WNBA teams, things like that. Women's sports has shifted from being treated as a charity to being treated as an investment property, a good one. Deloitte consulting firm said that they expect that $2.3 billion in revenue will come out of women's sports in 2025. And that number attracted a lot of eyeballs and made a lot of noise when they released this study, because, business people, they want to keep making money. They want to find the next big thing and get in on the ground floor. And that's been a common refrain from investors and from leadership across WNBA teams and WSL teams, really wherever you turn, is that this isn't something that they're doing because they think that it makes them look good. They're sort of past that. That doesn't really matter for investors anymore. What they're doing it because it makes business sense. And I think that it has been pretty transformational for women's sports. We could spend hours talking about how that's long overdue. And the big reason why it hasn't always been that way is just sort of the way society is structured. But my personal opinion is just like, better late than never, like, because we're in this golden age. And like you said, it's also just beginning, which is like really fascinating to me. Because it's sort of hard to envision, like when you think about where we were 5 years ago with the NWSL, WNBA, like you said, and where we'll be 5 years from now, like it's impossible to tell. And like the sky's the limit. I would also say one thing that that feels like a common, I wouldn't say criticism, but like a concern, is sort of saturation. I've found when I'm speaking with people in the know, like leaders and investors and people around sport, is it's less of a concern because of the way information is shared these days. So what I'm trying to say is that like there's like, I'm a huge college basketball fan. I can watch any college basketball game at all. They're not worried about, like, I logged on to ESPN the other night to watch Syracuse basketball, and I could literally watch every D1 men's and women's basketball game. And they're not worried about audience fracturing. They're not worried about saturating the market, because there might be a small group of fans who want to watch this, but they're going to watch it. And I think of the same thing with women's sports. It's, for so long, women's sports has been compared to, sports have been used as the benchmark. Will the WNBA ever reach the same viewership as the NBA? Will NWSL ever reach the same viewership as MLS or the Premier League? And slowly, people are realizing that that's not really a useful benchmark. It's a whole different sport. This is a big refrain from women's sports advocates. It's apples and oranges. It's not meant to be a one-to-one match, the WNBA and the NBA. The WNBA is its own entity, and they're fine with, I happened to be in Vegas during the WNBA finals, so I got to go to an Aces Mercury game. Again, when in town, why not? They seat like 12,000 people at the Michelob Ultra Arena, and it was jam-packed, and like that's good for them. That fits for the league. That fits for the market. They got great viewership online, and that's what's really changed recently, is the idea that we're not necessarily in a spot where people are like, let's try to play catch up and directly compare to the men. And that's why I think the Women's Baseball League is really interesting, because they've said they're probably aiming to play at ballparks that seat around 5,000 people. For the first season next year, they're going to do neutral site. They're not going to have like home fields yet. Which makes sense, just to, I would think travel is expensive between the two coasts. That 5,000 makes a lot of sense. Like, if you don't need to play at Fenway Park and have a 28,000 seat venue that's half full, you can play in a place that you're going to sell out. That was actually a big part of the Athletes Unlimited Softball League that Kim Ng, the former Marlins GM, is the commissioner of, that played this summer. They played in smaller ballparks, a lot of college softball stadiums, and they were selling out places. And that's a much better thing for their business, to feel like it's a commodity, feel like you got to get in there, that it's hard to get tickets to. It's the same reason that, the way people buy concert tickets, you got to see this event, and there's a limited amount of seats to get. So anyway, I'm going off on a tangent, but I just think that it's a really interesting moment, and it's refreshing, because
Absolutely.
I think that a lot of the noise about the WNBA, especially probably before Caitlin Clark got into the league, was just just how far behind it is the NBA. And of course, the NBA has like a 60-year head start, and so it's really interesting to see. And it's really interesting to see the sort of, I don't know if patience is the right word, but sort of that foresight from the leaders in charge, where they know it's a long game, because that's how fandoms happen. They don't happen overnight. Rarely do people come and say, I'm going to pick a team and support them without any background. Like, you grow up in this, like there's something that convinces you that I'm going to support this team. And it just takes time. And women's sports hasn't been always given the opportunity to do that, because the leagues have been so underfunded for so long. Teams fold, teams move. There's no way to watch them. There's no way to read about them. That's all changing. And it's sort of like, again, we play it forward 30 years from now, where there's going to be a whole generation of young men and women who have never lived without this sort of, the support of the WNBA. Who knows what the fandom will look like, which is exciting, very exciting.
Absolutely. Well, Katie McInerney, thank you for talking about this new women's professional baseball league and women's sports in general, which I'm glad to see is growing, moving. It's so exciting to see. It's so exciting to see the enthusiasm in the people. And like you said, playing in front of a packed crowd beats playing in front of 5,000 people in a 30,000 seat stadium. You don't have the same atmosphere. It doesn't feel the same. But this is the way to go. Katie McInerney, she is the senior sports editor for the Boston Globe. Thank you so much for joining us, and we will probably call on you again to dive further more into women's sports around the country.
I'll be ready for it. Call me anytime.
Thank you so much. We really appreciate it. We will be right back on the Sports IQ after we take a quick timeout.
Are you tired of your website making your business look bad? Is your current web developer dropping the ball? Let's face it, if your website isn't making you money, it's broken. Let Neon Rain create a website that turns your visitors into customers. Neon Rain has worked with hundreds of businesses across North America, building custom websites and applications with modern designs that are easy to update and work well on mobile devices. They can do it for you too. What sets Neon Rain apart? They actually deliver on their promises. Call today for a free consultation. 303-957-3092. That's Neon Rain at 303-957-3092. Or visit them at neonrain.com.
One thing we didn't get to in headlines was the reports now that LSU former coach Brian Kelly rejecting 2 buyout deals. $54 million is what he's owed, right? 90% of what's owed on his contract. $54 million. So some reporting on ESPN saying that documents said that he was offered $25 million in a lump sum, said no, and then producer Tony $30 million. I mean, come on.
Yeah, I mean, look, Brian Kelly may not have been the greatest coach in the world. He probably isn't never going to win a national champion, but he's not a dummy, and neither is his agent.
Yeah.
You made the deal, LSU. You put this in writing. You knew what it was going to cost when you decided to let him go.
Yeah.
So, look, as John Malkovich said in the movie, pay that man his money.
Yeah. Yeah. Consequence. We're in an era right now where it's like, well, I know that's what I said, but I don't really want it. No, this is what you said. This is the consequence for what you said or what you signed your name to. So sorry. Yeah, $54 million. Pay the man. Absolutely. Hey, we saw a couple of college teams almost pay the piper for their great success this year. But we were talking here before the show that these close games this weekend, like for Indiana, this is needed for a team. If you have national championship aspirations, you need to be in a game like this where you've got to come up and not just breeze to a 30-point win.
Yeah, this was an important contest for Indiana. Not only beating Penn State, yeah, Penn State's having some real rough troubles now, but you were in that environment. You got the win in a close game where you had to make something happen. You had to make a play down the stretch. That only helps you come playoff time. You're not going to get to the college football playoff and blow teams out 56-0. It's not going to happen. These are going to be tight ball games against good programs that is going to take your concentration from starting gun to finishing bell and everything in between. And for teams like Oregon, who had to rally and come back and beat Iowa at Iowa, again, in a very hostile environment, that can only help you come playoff time because your players know what to expect when they're in those moments. playing good teams and playing close games has got to be something that is needed when you get to the playoff time. That's what I talked about with Kevin Noon about. You worry about it for Ohio State because since Texas, they have not been challenged at all.
Yeah. Yeah, they have not at all. By the way, don't look now, but look who's back in the top 10. Texas, the preseason number one. Speaking of, the closest game Ohio State's played all the year was the first one against the Longhorns there in Columbus. Falling out of the polls, there was some talk that maybe, Sark may be the next to be fired in October. They've quietly worked their way back in, had a couple of really bad overtime wins against Kentucky and Mississippi State, but they found their way back right now, 7-2. And it looks like right now that Thanksgiving Day matchup, the rivalry game against A&M, could be they may need to win that to get in the playoffs. I mean, but they have a shot right now.
Yeah, I mean, you're right now. If you're a Texas Longhorn fan, you are in playoff mode. Yeah. You've got to win these games. You've got 2 key games coming up in the next 3 weeks. You got to beat Georgia this week, and you got to beat Texas A&M. Now, that's a tall order. That's 2 top 5 teams with a quarterback who hasn't really set the world on fire, but it's there for the taking. And if you can do that, then you will have earned your way into the college football playoff. No questions asked. A 10-2 Texas team, even if they don't play for the SEC title, with their schedule and what they've done, if they can go 10-2, they deserve a shot in the playoff.
Yeah, we're out of time today, but one thing we'll talk about tomorrow is in terms of resumes. And we look at Texas, a 3-loss Texas team would be hard to keep out if it comes down to that. When you've beaten, a 3-loss Texas team, when you've beaten Oklahoma at number 6, Vandy at number 9, and then potentially Georgia at 5 this week, or number 3 Texas A&M, it'd be hard to say them no. But we'll see what happens. Okay. Hey, we're out of time. Thanks so much to our guests. Once again, Katie McInerney stopping by. Also with Kevin Noon as well. Appreciate you. Hey, it's Monday. We're just getting started. Make this a fantastic Monday, the best ever Monday. And we'll do it again tomorrow here on the Sports IQ.
Thanks for listening to Sports IQ with Larry Smith, Monday through Friday. Continue the conversation at SportsIQ LS. We'll see you next time.